this very important, exchange of views during this time. I know that it's not a very, what you call this, it's not a very conventional time since we're having a pandemic and then we are facing a lot of issues right now. But it is timely nevertheless, since one of the most affected sectors in this pandemic is the media. And we are experiencing actually the shrinking media space. So we are glad that we are joined here by very distinguished persons who will share with us their views on how are we faring actually in the region in terms of media freedom. So we'll start that discussion as soon as this technical difficulties resolved again. I'm so sorry for for having these issues right now. Um,
Karel, go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mandeep. So welcome everyone to this very important discussion again. So this discussion is titled Commemorating World Press Freedom 2021, Confronting the Regression of Media Freedom in Southeast Asia. So this is in itself first a webinar and a report launch as well of the consultations that ADN and its partners did over the last few months. So we are glad again that you are here with us. And to open the ceremony or the program, I would like to call on Mr. Ishal Supriyadi to give us a bit of an opening remark. The floor is yours, Ishal.
Yeah, thank you, Karel. First, greetings from Asia Democracy Network, and I would like to warmly welcome dignitaries, speakers. We got line here, Dr. Jasada Salatong from Chulalongkorn University, Thailand. We also have Ming Kwok Lin from the UNESCO office. And then my senior, always, Yuyun Wahyuningrum, the Indonesia representative in AICHR. And I don't know whether Pramas Chandran from Malaysia Kini is already arrived. And then Melinda De Jesus from CMFR, the Philippines. I'm glad to having all you here together with us to launch the State of Media Freedom in Southeast Asia, confronting the regressions of media freedom in Southeast Asia. I also would like to welcome friends and all practitioners of media freedoms, democracy, and human rights in these occasions. I think it is a privilege for the Asia Democracy Network to host this event, to launch our assessment reports on the recent state of media freedom in Southeast Asia, and also to mark the celebrations of World Press Freedom 2021. It's a little bit early, I guess. I think today we will share some of the key pointers of the assessments, which will include highlights and recommendations from the report. And we will learn perspective, of course, from the experts and the current stage of media freedoms. We wish the report and the comments can be useful for all of us to help our future work in advocate media freedoms. And then, by the way, this assessment is a part of our programs in advocating the media space and advancements, which involve 5 countries in South Asia. The assessment is conducted through series of consultations of the media freedom stakeholders, which includes journalists, media associations, practitioners, governments representative, member of parliament, think tank organization, as well as academicians. Then they're involved in 5 series that we conducted in 5 countries. So let me express my gratitude to our partners who works with us to organize consultation. My sincerely thanks for your support and dedication that we can make it happen. For friends, colleagues in associations of Media Cyber Indonesia or AMSI, and then the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism or PCIJ, Gerakan Media Merdeka Geram Malaysia, and then Cambodia Journalist Alliance Association or Cambodia. And last but not least is Thailand Journalist Association, TGA, and a good help of the friends Kunsin Fahtun Sawarut that building the network in Thailand. I think today events will not only give us to learn each other, but also an opportunity to strengthen network in order to extend solidarity to friends of journalists, democracy and human rights activists who are continuously struggle in different part of Asia. As a repressions is increasingly happen with sophisticated way. I think the Asia Democracy Network saying an importance to continuously putting all efforts to keep assessing and defending media freedom in Asia, as this is very critical pillars on democracy. This time the ADN wanted to doing it because we have non-existence of media freedom organization in the regions, but perhaps there will be one very soon who will consolidate the matters in the coming futures. Thanking you all for the participations, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. In solidarity, and then return back to you, Karel.
Thank you very much, Ishal, for opening our discussion and for giving us an insight on why and what inspired us to do this work. So I would like to pass the discussion to Mr. Mandeep Singh for a bit of an insight on how our report went, what the contents, essentially, the main findings, and the recommendations. No? So I would like to give the floor to Mr. Mandeep Singh for the findings of our AMSA report, which we conducted over the past months. So Mandeep, the floor is yours, and you can start the discussion.
Thank you, Karel. A very good afternoon to all the distinguished panelists and Ichal and also friends who are listening live through Facebook and also through the Zoom. Allow me to do a quick share on my PowerPoint. Can you all see the PowerPoint? Yeah. Okay. Very quickly, first, like mentioned by Ichal earlier, that this study has been done in 5 countries, which is Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, and Cambodia. And this study or research consultation was carried out from November 2020 till March 2021. And the objective again for this study is basically to identify the pressing problems in media freedom in these 5 countries, and also to come out with a set of recommendation and to possible find a future collaboration if possible, for this region. And how do we actually from different group come together to define the shrinking space of media freedom. So the report is actually already, the initial report is placed on our website. I believe my colleague will share soon in the chat box, but what I will share is just a summary, on what we have gathered on the issues, and also then I will share in terms of the recommendation. The key issues, the key issues that what I will share is basically on the censorship, the media repression, fake news, restriction on access of information, which is freedom of information, lack or absentee of policies to protect whistleblowers, and the lack or absence of policy or mechanism to protect and promote media practitioners' welfare and safety. While um, from this research that we have done, or probably the consultation that we have done, we noticed that there is a common similarity within these 5 countries in Southeast Asia. What is on the screen now is basically some of the act, or not often government use to do crackdown in against the journalists or against citizens, or normally towards dissenting freedom of expression, right? But before I go in details, probably just allow me to quickly recap a very important report which I believe most of you have read, which was out last week. A Reporters Without Border uh, ranking report. And basically, allow me just to quickly run through. Cambodia, we have seen that there's no change in Cambodia in terms of the ranking report, but again, there's nothing to be proud of because it is ranked number 144 out of 180. And then if we go to Indonesia, significantly Indonesia, there's been some improvement in Indonesia, where there is 6 ranking, which is improvement of 6 ranking, where it came from 119 to 113. Malaysia, sadly, was once beacon of hope, was once leading, has one of the leading country in terms of reform or in terms of media freedom, have witnessed a massive drop from 101 to 119. And Malaysia actually in the report was actually mentioned in the report that, due to the change of government, which I believe all of you guys are aware, it improved quite well from 145 in 2018. It came to 101, and today is 119. I believe later Pramesh can share details of Malaysia as well. Philippines, we see that also there is decrease from 136 to 138, and Thailand, there is some improvement where we see 3. This is just a quick sharing of information, but if we see on the screen now, basically the similarity of these few countries, if you see Cambodia, Malaysia, and Thailand, there is something that in common, where in Cambodia and Thailand is the less majesty. In Malaysia, which is something very similar, is the Sedition Act, right? But in these 5 countries as well, and then in Cambodia and Malaysia and Thailand, again, you see the similarity that they have the state of emergency. Of course, you have the similar act in Thailand. In Malaysia now, we are in a state of emergency, where everything is allowed except of parliament. But again, these have helped the government actually to strengthen, using the state of emergency to strengthen the to decrease or to shrink the freedom of expression in particular, whereby and then we also noticed that there been similarity, where in terms of act that is being used to control internet means. In Indonesia, you have ITE Act, you electronic information and transaction law, ITE. In Malaysia, you have the section 233 of the Communication and Multimedia Act. In Philippines, you have the Cybercrime Act. In Thailand, you have the Computer Crime Act. And as well in Cambodia, you have National Internet Gateway. So these are the few acts that is often been used by government or by authorities to dissent freedom of expression, to limit the space of media freedom. And also there's a few cases that I would like to highlight in Philippines, especially where This particular act or something similar was used against Maria Ressa, and which was found guilty in Malaysia, where a sedition act was used against Al Jazeera in the last year, where Al Jazeera was investigated by the police for exposing the issue of the migrants during pandemic. And of course, the Malaysia Kini case, where they were found guilty of contempt of court, which was fined about 124,000, 25,000 US dollar. So these are some of the similarities of act in this country. I will move to the next part, which is on the fake news. As I believe all of us may agree that the rise of fake news in this not only in this region but globally as well. But there is a common thing that there's similarity again in this region, where the government seem to be controlling the narrative on what is right and what is fake, right? This is because if often there is a criticism being made towards the government, or if there is an issue that the government is in trouble in, they often say that this is fake, this is not true. So often that action will be taken against media or individual. And there's also something that in some countries that we notice that there is no fact checking run by independent organization, where it's been run by government, which is, this is very dangerous. A fact checking where been run by government is definitely is not right, because again they are in the higher stake to determine what is right, what is wrong, what is fake, and what is not fake. This is on the fake news. Moving towards access of information, again, in some countries, for example, like in Thailand, I think where we were, where during the consultation was highlighted that there is freedom of information act. Media can get information, but again, it's limited, right? Is the government who decides what kind of information to be provided and what kind of information is not being provided. But again, the general citizens also, they do not know how to participate or how to engage in terms of to get information. So again, often from the consultation that we get, we some of the findings that journalists faces problem, or media organization faces problem in to get information or reliable information or the accurate information from the government, because the government often, especially during the pandemic, they choose to provide whatever information they would like to provide, and journalists end up need to find sources from the government to get information to report to the public. And again, if and government always use this as well, that if the report doesn't benefits them, it was often been said that again has fake. So especially when it comes to COVID-19 information, or like in terms of we have listened a lot of issues that government are not reporting the right information in terms of COVID-19 information, so be it in terms of cases, so be it in terms of vaccine. So this is the issue again, it's because lack of information, and then there is no proper spirit of the freedom of information itself for some countries. For some countries, there is none at all. So of course, there is no spirit there, right? And another part is the whistle protection for whistleblower, which is because there is we notice the similarities. Common issue is again often whistleblowers have been attacked or been targeted by authorities, by those who in power, etc. So, and also citizens doesn't really feel safe, or they have less trust into the system in terms of exposing the truth, because in the event if they expose something the truth to the media or to any other party, they will be targeted and they will be somehow being arrested, being charged, or being the victim of the system, especially the authorities. So there must be more whistle blowing protection to be given to the general public and also to the media as well, because as we all believe and agree that media is important, or the fourth estate, whereby whistleblower governments should protect and should give more space for the whistleblowers. Um, Going towards the last part, which is the recommendation in our report, if I believe once you get, um, there is country by country issues and country by countries recommendation, but as whole, at the end, we are coming up proposing six recommendation for this region, for the governments and for media organization as well. Number one is based on the laws that I've highlighted earlier. There are some very repressive act or law that definitely must be amended or repealed. And if there is an amendment amendment, or if the government agree to repeal for any act, we at the end would like to propose to governments that before amending or doing the process of amendment and the process of enacting a new law to protect the space, ADN proposed that government should engage with stakeholders, so be it civil society, media organization, individual experts, etc. And it's not that for governments to come out with act without consultation. Um, for the second one, we again call upon governments in this region to embrace the spirit of freedom of information and whistleblower policies, especially for countries that doesn't have freedom of information yet. Countries like Malaysia, which is is sad to look at the situation, but we call upon governments that to embrace the spirit of freedom of information. Thirdly, we urge government to do better in engaging with media. Often we have received during the consultation, we gather information that there is no consultation being done with media organization in terms of to talk about safety of media, to talk about the welfare of media, to talk about the space. Often media journalists, because at this particular juncture of when we talk about the pandemic era, we must not forget that media journalists are also frontliners. They are also risking their life going to the ground in terms of gathering information. And media also shouldn't be looked or shouldn't be portrayed as enemy of the state or enemy of the government or authorities. Media shall be friends of, I mean, not say friends, but media should be part of a component of communication that to disseminate information to the public. And of course, media have all the rights as well to criticize and to hold government accountable. On the fourth recommendation, which is back then we have a regional organization governing or to pull together uh, civil society from the region, also media practitioners, etc., together. So looking at the situation in this region, we in ADN would like to propose that in order to have a better solidarity, we should have a better solidarity and networking, because looking at the situation in this region, we feel that it should be a regional collaboration together in terms of fighting of the rise of authoritarian in this region, where we see the limiting, I mean, as the data that I shared earlier, there is no country is doing good in terms of the index. So we believe that we should have a stronger solidarity and networking together to push and to probably reclaim back the shrinking space. And we also would like to highlight that to have a continuous training for media and journalists, especially in terms of the value of human rights. There are journalists who are new, who are keen in terms of reporting of human rights, but also sometimes they don't really understand the value. I'm not saying they do not know, but perhaps training and collaboration between media and human rights organization, because in this region it's not only their shrinking space of media freedom, but the space of human rights, the space of civil liberty, social justice is all shrinking down. So it's good that we can have good training. We get media as friends of human rights organization to together highlight this. And this we believe, or we propose that, or probably we offer, I don't know, I'm speaking probably on behalf of Vichal, we are happy to work with media organizations that to have collaboration on human rights trainings. If not ADN, I believe there are many other regional organizations will be happy to do. And lastly, is strengthening efforts to combat fake news, fact checking, right? We strongly propose that fact checking to be run by independent organization, not government institution. This is because often the trust of the citizens and the people or the general public is more towards the independent body, number one. Number two is because we shall not allow governments to decide what is fake and what is not fake. So therefore, an independent organization comes from whether it's media, universities, or experts to come together. Well, the mechanism can be decided, but later on. But however, we strongly suggest that this fact checking shall be led and be organized by an independent body. That's all my sharing. I'm happy to engage with any of you in the, I mean, after these forums, etc., to discuss about this report further. Thank you very much. Over to you, Karel.
Thank you very much, Mandy, for your presentation of the findings of the ADN research. So if I may interject, no, this research is collaboration, as Ishal mentioned earlier, between 6 organizations, including ADN. So this is in part, this report was made in partnership with Asosiasi Media Cyber Indonesia, the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, Gerakan Media Merdeka Malaysia, Cambodian Journalists Alliance, and the Thai Journalists Association. So this was made in collaboration with them. Now we proceed with the next and most important part of our discussion today, which is an honest conversation, really, on the state of media in Southeast Asia, wherein we have invited 5 very important persons who are at the forefront of engaging stakeholders in promoting press freedom in the region. So the discussion will be a free flow talk show type discussion, wherein the moderator will pose questions and each speaker will also be able to pose questions to their co-speakers. So let us keep this informal and respectful while we unravel the different complexities of the issues that we are facing here in Southeast Asia. So among our discussants is Dr. Yuyun Wayuniru, the representative of Indonesia, the Republic of Indonesia to ICHR, or the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. We will also be joined by Ms. Melinda De Jesus of CMFR the Philippines. She's the executive director of one of the media freedom advocates organization in the Philippines. Also with us is Mr. Premesh Chandran, the chief executive officer of Malaysia Kini, We are also joined by Professor Jetseda Saratong, Professor and Head of Communication Arts Department of the Chulalongkorn University. And uh, and finally, we also have Dr. Ming Kwok Lim, the advisor for media and communication of the UNESCO. So thank you very much for joining us in this very important discussion this afternoon. So our discussion will revolve around four topics. So it will revolve around the legal and political environment in which our media operate. Secondly, it will tackle as well the impediments to the freedom of information and other impediments to truth telling. We will talk about as well the welfare and safety of journalists, not only before the pandemic, but also during the pandemic. And finally, we will come up or we will engage with each other to figure out possible recommendations and possible action points in which civil society organizations and governments and NGOs can work together to promote the media space. So to start with our discussion regarding the legal and political environment, perhaps I would like to raise this question. So Mandeep earlier talked about, there are various laws that were enacted not only during the pandemic, but also prior to pandemic, which affected, which in turn played a certain as a certain actor to the current state of media in the region. So, I would like to go to Thailand first because we have certain laws in Thailand that are a bit controversial. So, Dr. Jetsada, uh, what are the wisdom, or how were these laws enacted, and how did they affect the media freedom, the situation of media freedom in Thailand? Did they give any justifications on why these laws were enacted, and how do the media live under this legal regime? Dr. Jess,
Okay.
please.
Okay. Thank you, Carol, and good afternoon, all the panelists. I'm very glad to be a part of today's discussion. So, according to what you already presented at the beginning, well, actually, I can see that media in Southeast Asia, we are facing in the same situation, which is not quite good in terms of media freedom. And there are many laws and regulations that put pressure on the work of media in Southeast Asian countries. Well, actually, for the law and regulations that you highlighted, that has been discussed and debated in Thailand for a long time. That these laws and regulations really put a lot of like pressure on the work of media, even nowadays. And the situation is even like even tougher because right now we are in the state of emergency. Due to the COVID-19 situation. And actually, I do agree with you that well, we talk about fact checking, it needs to be done. It needs to be established not by the government, but right now the government of Thailand also established the anti-fake news center in Thailand as well. So, well, when I look at the situation in Thailand, well, I have to say that media in Thailand has been, like in this kind of tough situation with this kind of limitation for a long time. Like it has been like this for a long time. So we have to adjust ourselves, in order to survive, in order to do our work within this limitation. But one thing that I can see that, okay, over the past decades, we can see development and changes in Thai media freedom as well. Like in the past, it was heavily monopolized by the government. The government had like a center, like censorship center, in order to filter and screen all of the news, not only the news information and all the content, but at that time, the flow information was not this universal. Like right now, like we have social media and we have like many channels, but right now, I think what we are facing right now in terms of the nature of the media work in Thailand, I think same as many countries in Southeast Asia is self-censorship. So self-censorship is the situation that we are facing right now. So well, it's also related to Southeast Asian culture, like nepotism and connection, right? So if like you work for any media, like in any media in Thailand, for in what content you need to have, or you will have connection or something, like related to political parties, to like business sector. So I think this kind of culture, it's embedded in Southeast Asian media culture. Okay, I think this is the thing that I can reflect from Thailand point of view. However, luckily, fortunately, in order to have a media that free from power of politics and power of business, you need to have, like, ideally speaking, you need to have like a media to work for the sake of the public. Fortunately, about 10 years before, Thailand successfully established public broadcasting service, like we call Thai PBS or Thai Public Broadcasting Service. It was the first PBS in Southeast Asia. And I think over the past 10 years, Thai PBS proved that they can work freely, like in order to do check and balance and investigative information and journalism. However, other media in Thailand, other news outlet and other news organizations in Thailand also said that it's really difficult for them because they have no financial support from tax like Thai PBS does. So I think, like, actually a few days before, I discussed this topic with my friends from Thai PBS, that how can we galvanize, or how can we like take the spillover from the work of Thai PBS to other media in Thailand, so that we can like minimize, or we can be free from censorship, like so that we can report any news without fear and favor. So I think this is my reflection from my point of view from Thailand context.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jess. Is this something that you also experience in Malaysia? So I would like to ask Mr. Pramesh, how is the situation of media freedom in Malaysia in terms of the legal regime, and how it affects your work as a journalist?
Hi, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me clearly. Thank you so much for having me here, and really enjoyed the report presentation done earlier Monday. I think, as Monday mentioned, the last year or so has been quite difficult with the new government. There are now a new law on fake news, where we're not allowed to talk about issues related to COVID-19 or the emergencies. Whatever the government deems fake, they could arrest us very quickly. And other areas of the law also being tightened, use of Sedition Act, use of other acts against satirists such as Fahmi Reza, etc. So I think that the question is, as media fight back, it has also emerged that there are increasing number of whistleblowers who are speaking up. For recently, in the last few days, we've seen schoolgirls talking about issues related to girls in schools, and the treatment of young girls by their teachers, etc. So I think that when we talk about media, we should also look at how do we encourage whistleblowing? How do we encourage people to stand up and speak up? Because the media can only amplify the message, but often the message has to come from bona fide grievances and an ability of the people to speak up. The people themselves are cowed into silence, and it is very then difficult for the media to do their job. But if it's a popular issue, for example, in Malaysia, there were people who were selling burgers, trying to make a living selling burgers, who were fined atrocious amounts because of operating outside the hours because of COVID. But there was such a strong support from the people against this the seemingly overhandedness by the government and the police, and then that improves. I think in many cases today, because of both the media and the role of social media, the media may play an amplifying voice, and even in fact, even the government passes laws that are trying to silence the press, the public is with us. It's becoming increasingly difficult because the public voices are very loud. For example, in Malaysia Kini's case, where we were found in contempt of the court and fined an atrocious amount for our readers' comments, we managed to raise that 500,000 ringgit, $125,000 fine within 4 hours based on public support. So I think when the public are with us, media is strong. So we need to look at strategies of how do we connect media, not so much with government and civil society, but how do we connect media with the people themselves, and how do the people themselves find the voice to speak up on their issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prem. Now that we've heard from two countries, no, that perhaps these legal regimes are not really doing so great for the state of media freedom in the region. I would like to hear from Dr. Ming how he reacts when he hears these kinds of sentiments, given that he works in intergovernmental organizations who monitor this state. No, how do you assess the situation of media freedom in the region, Dr. Ming?
Thank you, Carol. I hope everyone can hear me. So first of all, I agree with almost everything that Mandip have presented just now, and it's all very true and very real. And we do keep an eye out on these issues. And in particular in the Southeast Asia region, and certainly due to COVID as well, we noticed that first of all, the media freedom is threatened by economic pressure, which is already not in a good shape since the past 10 years, where a lot of advertising revenue has gone to the tech giants. But of course, this situation has been exacerbated by COVID-19 pandemic with further drop in advertising revenue. And the second itself is the safety issue of journalists. Journalists still needs to go to places to cover, to talk to people, and not everything can be done from home. And this causes a certain amount of danger physically to journalists. And this is in addition to all the physical intimidations, harassments, threats, raids conducted by states and certainly other non-state actors as well. So in addition to all of the problems that journalists face, now we have a health hazard as well. And of course, this is not just in Southeast Asia, throughout the world. I think the Press Emblem campaign has noticed that more than 1,000 journalists have died due to COVID-related illness. And this may or may not be a part of the work, but it is important to note. Thankfully, in some countries, journalists are considered as frontliners, and they are giving priority in terms of vaccination. Just last month, Indonesia has started vaccinated journalists by the thousands. And yesterday, the Malaysian government announced that journalists will also be pushed forward for vaccination as well. So that is certainly a good sign. And third, and speakers have already alluded to this, is the fact that national authorities and governments are using COVID-19 as a pretext to limit freedom of expression and limit access to information and even access to people's movement. So all of this are not really in line with international standards. As a short reminder to everyone and governments alike, that any sort of restrictions, including the use of emergency powers that restricts human rights, including freedom of expressions and freedom of opinion, must go through the same as any other sort of test. We call it the three-part test, of course. It must be legitimate. It must be for a purpose and appropriate. And it must be, of course, within the legal framework, the laws. And in terms of emergency, it really must have a very strong purpose. and it must have a sunset clause. It must have a fixed period of time when it will be lifted. And that is certainly something that UNESCO's and of course and OHCHR have already mentioned, and these are the things that governments are encouraged to really follow, the established guidelines set up by international organizations as well as international standards to really respect the limitation and when and where those limitations can be met, put in place. So these are some observations regarding media freedom in the region at the moment right now. Back to you, Karel.
Thank you, Dr. Ni. I would like to go back to Mr. Prem because I know that there has been several issues in Malaysia, and most of the culprits to these issues which affect media freedom in your country is brought about by the laws that have been in place for the longest time, and there have been attempts at reforms, and yet these were not affected. No. So from your point of view as a practitioner, as a journalist yourself, what do you think goes on in the minds of governments when they implement this sorts of law? What do you think is their intent in doing these things? No.
Well, I believe that they are nervous about the strong public participation, especially on social media, which voices out dissent and disagreement to some of their policies. And the use of laws is a way to drive that dissent underground or silence that dissent. As you know, a lot of messaging goes on WhatsApp, on social media, and people share stuff on TikTok. A lot of videos and cartoons going around. So a lot of humor, satire, making fun of some of the government policies are there. Like today, I saw a video, where the burger guy was going to get fined 50,000, but they said, well, if you call yourself a nightclub, you only get fined 5,000. So the burger guy started to dance and say, yeah, I'm not a burger guy, I'm a nightclub. And those humors just go viral, and it really hits to the core of how ridiculous some of these laws are, some of the policies are. So if you ask me, the government fear the media versus the people, they fear the people more. But the media obviously is an easy institution to hit, easy organization to hit. So they kind of try to control the media as an indirect way to control people's voices. So I think what we need to do is develop the symbiotic relationship between the media industry itself, journalists, etc., but always try to strengthen the voices of the people and push back against government legislation and law. Governments are not going to do away with laws overnight. They're not going to listen to some petition, some advocacy, say, yes, we're going to change. It has to take really a hard drive by the people themselves to push governments back towards accepting the reform agenda.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Prem. So are there any other reactions from our other panelists from the discussion regarding the law? Because we can also proceed to the other countries, for instance, in the Philippines. Maybe hear from Ms. Melinda, for instance. How are you experiencing all this? What laws have been affecting the media in the Philippines at this current point, Ms. Melinda? And how is the media surviving during this pandemic?
I'm not sure that we are surviving.
Oh.
You can hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Am I coming across?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't think we are surviving in the way that we would say that it is the same press institution. Everybody knows here the history and the role of the Philippine press as having been, in fact, for the longest time, set apart from the rest of the region for the longest time before the democratic waves that opened up the regimes around the countries, around the region. That the Philippines was there already recognized and practicing the kind of almost, we were criticized for it, almost the kind of Western adversariety towards government, because the orientation of the Philippine press is such that if there is power, then you must check that power by close scrutiny and bold and courageous coverage, which we've established. Investigative reporting regionally has been led in the Philippines, etc. It is no longer the case. We do media monitoring at the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility, and we could, if we had it, do content analysis as the primacy given to government sources, one without questioning, without criticism, without whatever. And we don't even need laws anymore in order to check it. Those laws are like the costume that is put on by government. Hey, we have the anti-terrorist law, or we have the cyber libel law, etc., cybercrime law, etc., that have been set up more recently that goes against the Constitution. They are now still discussing it in the Supreme Court, but how these could have been passed is a huge question as to whether, in fact, the strength of the value of press freedom had already been rooted sufficiently in the country or in the soil of our culture. I would have to say that perhaps that tradition that was real, that was historical, that led us out of so many of the periods of colonization to establish ourselves as a free and sovereign nation, may have been perhaps not seen as a driving value when we ourselves elect our own leaders. Because right now, the regime of Mr. Duterte has basically succeeded to silence the press. There are journalists who will stand apart and have done so. But when you think of it, in the sea of disinformation and misinformation, in the sea of poverty, where people are actually not worrying about press freedom, but how they are going to survive as people, as human beings, as families, the will to surrender to the state, you cannot blame people for just basically saying, well, it's just too much work for us. Remember that the major broadcast company in the region even had been closed down, despite the fact that if you looked at the legal background of it, there was no reason to do it. So what has happened in the Philippines is simply the takeover of an elected leader who did not want to be a democratic leader. And that we gave him too much of a pass. We gave him too much time. And that now it is fear that operates. And I have to tell you that there are those of us who survived the Marcos period. There are those of us who built up NGOs to protect and to strengthen press freedom that are wondering, given the pandemic, whether we can marshal those forces again and actually fight back. It almost seems to me that we would have to call for a kind of act of God. And thank God that the Philippines is a country of deep faith, and that we are saying that maybe those forces are the ones that are going to have to act. And let's see you work against that, whoever you are, that has summoned the kind of force that has become so much a source of intimidation, harassment, fear in the hearts of the owners of news organizations, fear in the hearts of journalists, if you do not do what the guidelines, the big guidelines of not shaking the boat. We can review this and try and find out, in fact, how a strong institution has just been cut down at the knees because it was part of a global trend. It really was part of a global trend to rule through division, to rule through polarization, to weaken the communal, to weaken the common ground. And I would have to challenge the international community, not necessarily foreigners, but us ourselves as international community, working perhaps with the forces of government that are in the UNESCO or in the United Nations. I think it is confronting the United Nations with its, to challenge it and find out whether, in fact, if in the United Nations, where you bring in everyone, Democrat or non-Democrat, and seat them and give them those places of power, whether the economic might and the military might is not in the end going to hold forth. It is a deep and human challenge. I think that we need to take, it can't just be talking about laws, because you can have laws and the laws can be thrown out. We seem to have reverted to the primitive state of caves. And we have to find ourselves now. What brought out humanity out of those caves in different periods of our history? Where are those lessons? And we need to find them, or we shall not be able to pass the torch to this next generation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Melinda, for that impassioned sharing. No, Ms. Yuyun, you represent Indonesia in ASEAN ICHR. How are you reacting to this, or upon hearing these things from our panelists? What's your reaction, and what is the ASEAN doing to actually expand media space in the region?
Thank you very much for having me, and congratulations for ADN for releasing this report. So far, I think there is as you may know, ASEAN, the way ASEAN see media is as important tool to distribute information, and now gradually government of ASEAN faced with some challenges in relation to fake news, misinformation, disinformation. Rather than addressing press freedom, many governments address the challenges of this digital technology by having some restriction. So if you look at a little bit deeper to the cooperation among ASEAN member states, there are no specific notion. There's no specific item in relation to cooperation. Media continue to be mentioned in the blueprint as tools to distribute information, and not necessarily addressing the human rights of journalists as human rights defenders, or media cooperation, and so on and so on. That is why I understand in the last workshop in relation to freedom of expression and opinion, Bambang Harimurti from Indonesia, a veteran journalist, suggested to have a regional body to protect the media freedom. Included in this body space or body mandate is to the protection of journalists, the protection of media freedom, the protection of the journalist ethic, and so on in relation to this, as well as addressing or become the party that governments can discuss in relation to addressing misinformation and disinformation. This is something that I also tabled in a number of meetings, but it seems like there is a little appetite to this idea, and perhaps a little appetite to the whole frame of or the whole aspect of media freedom. You can also see in the region, as mentioned earlier by the researcher, by Mandip, that we are dominated by authoritarian regime, which suppress media freedom. Media practitioners are rather seen as a threat to the regime rather than as a check and balance. perhaps it's something that need to be addressed. How to change this? How to put how to turn the table to perceive media practitioners as not a friend like what Mandip earlier said, but it's an actor, a very important actor to ensure that we have a democracy principle intact.
Thank you for your thoughts, Ms. Yuyun, on that. Now we proceed to another sector of the discussion, which is a discussion on how the information space has been weaponized, contributing to the current state of media freedom in the region. Ms. Melinda, I would like to get back to you. You know, since the election of Duterte, there has been a lot of discussion on this. You know, some say that social media was the one who elected him, that the elections were primarily decided on the number of likes and whatnot. So, and during his tenure until present, this has been true regarding, you know, the policies as well, on sugarcoating certain policies that are deemed undemocratic. So what are the instances, or what are the current impediments to truth telling that are being used not only in the Philippines but also in the region? Ma'am, please.
Impediments?
Yes.
Impediments. What is the word?
Impediments to
Right.
truth telling.
Okay. I think probably the example in the Philippines is the most dramatic and the most illustrative of how the government seized the power of social media and used it for the purposes of propaganda, to divide, to demonize those that they thought were oppositionists, to establish false narratives about historical pasts, to do historical revisions. Uh, Very clever use of this great power that is in social media. And before you knew it, mind control was established. That's exactly what's happened. It's as though a whole majority of population, and he did win an election, so the majority of the population had become brainwashed. What is the function then? How do you fight that kind of impact is the question, and it is a huge question. And I think we're facing it much belatedly because we've only now finally stirred the social media companies to recognize that they've had a responsibility in terms of the role that they played in making it possible for this to happen. Now, it would not be so bad, I think, if it were all private and genuinely organic. But when it uses the money that people pay so that they can pay government employees, and then it is used to demean and diminish truth in the community, then that, to my mind, is a kind of a sabotage of the common good. I mean, how do you fight that? How do you fight that? I think it's a fundamental question that, unfortunately, in the Philippines, we extended a 6-month honeymoon, which is traditional. You elect a new person, you give him lots of pass. And in that 6 months, there was a killing campaign on the drugs. And there was the weaponizing of propaganda. Because you can have propaganda. You can have propaganda that is based on factual, what the government is actually doing. But when you have propaganda that puts the seeds of division and polarization and hatred from within that own community, then I think we need to understand how much more difficult that is going to be to erase. Why? Because in many cases, so many of those who have been brainwashed are still just holding the gadgets in front of their hands. It's still there. So how do you liberate them? So The question is, were those impediments set? Indeed, they were. It is a classic case. It should be studied by people with more resources and the NGOs that have looked at the issues of misinformation and disinformation in the Philippines. But we do have the classic example of how the powers of government misused social media in order to weaken the force of truth to emerge, because that has been really the principle of having a free press. You let the dialogue, the diversity of opinions rise. But when you have government then becoming the dominant player in the social media field, what is your weapon with which to fight back?
Dr. Jess, is this weaponization of propaganda and these impediments to truth-telling that Ms. Melinda mentioned that's happening in the Philippines, are these things that are also happening in Thailand right now?
Well,
Given that we recently transitioned from, a military-led government to one that is now an elected government.
well,
Your
actually,
thoughts, sir?
well, when I listen to Melinda, like, wow, we share many things in common. Are we in the same country? Well, actually, right now, there is a big crash between like younger generation and older generation. As you may know, if you learn, or you may have heard about, or you may have seen the political confrontation in Thailand, that we have been, like two sides, right? The yellow side and red side, like. Right now, well, many years gone by, many decades gone by, and it has been changed from yellow and red, just like what you can see in Malaysia as well, yellow and red as well. And right now, we call, like pro-democratic and pro-government side, and then like right now, I said that like what Melinda said, it's just like what we face right now in Thailand. Because if I ask my students, which is younger generation, they exactly say the same thing like what Melinda said, that why do we have to be in with the government that we didn't elect? Like why we have to be, like in under the regime like this. And as you know that, well, actually our current government, it's many of the government and politicians are from their military regime, right? So actually this is the same situation, that the atmosphere in Thailand, like same as many countries in Southeast Asia, we are dealing with authoritarianism in many countries in Southeast Asia, and that's why we have to deal with this kind of regime. So we're facing the same situation. And I also agree with Yuyun as well. I also think that we are in the same country, that the the government, like haven't seen media or journalism or journalist or reporter as check and balance tool that improve or will help or benefit the development of the country as a whole. But they see reporters, they see journalists, they see media as a threat. So when you see media as a threat, you will suppress, you will do anything in order to control the threat, right? Just like you look at media as a cancer or like COVID-19, and you want to inject vaccine, to do anything in order to limit the spread or the pandemic. But actually, it's not like that. Journalism or media is not a cancer, but actually we have to be functional in order to to make sure that check and balance system in the country is functional. So I think like this kind of mindset have to be equipped, have to be shared, or have to change, like for government. That's one thing. And another way, I think media literacy is really important. I think we need to increase the awareness for the younger generation, that the role of media, the role of the role of media, the role of journalism is really important, and the freedom of media is really important for democratization. So I think like UNESCO also work very hard on this side in order to raise awareness in terms of freedom of media and media roles. So I think we have to work hand in hand, you know, like from government side, they have to understand. For the business sector as well, I mean, the owner of the media have to understand as well. And for civil society, we have to realize our power. We can voice our voice through the platforms that we have. I think like all of the sector have to work together hand in hand in order to change the culture, media culture that we're facing right now in Southeast Asia.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jess. I would like to go to Dr. Ning because Dr. Jess mentioned earlier that UNESCO has been doing some things or a lot of actions to sort of change this culture that's happening, that's preventing the region from achieving true freedom for the media. So I would like to ask you, Dr. Ning, what sort of actions are present right now?
Well, UNESCO looks at media freedom, freedom of expression, access to information in a very comprehensive manner. So it is not just one thing, and very broadly, I would say that our actions falls into one of the three. So these are the standard settings, including the research and the policy that goes into it. The capacity building part of it. And the third is the awareness raising part of it. The first, of course, the international standards means that we are guided by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and of course by UNESCO's own resolutions, mandate, and programs. And we do our research, produce papers, and to help understand the situation globally and regionally a little bit better, do assessments and things like that. And we have also been supporting, of course, the capacity. It has been mentioned earlier already that the continuous training of journalists is useful, and we agree with that. And our capacity buildings has always been quite attuned to what is needed at the time. In fact, right now we have two new trainings that's available, and I'll put it in the chat box for everyone to take a look. And if you're interested, you can, of course, sign on to it. The first is a capacity building on international standards. That one is more for judicial actors, lawyers and judges and prosecutors, if they're interested. The second one is on how to report safely for women journalists. And it's a collaboration with the International Women's Media Foundation. And that is also brand new. We just launched that. So these are some of the latest capacity building trainings that we have. And of course, the COVID situation has really pushed us to produce more of this kind of online training materials. And the third one I mentioned just now is the awareness raising. And as we know, in a few days, it will be World Press Freedom Days. And it is true that UNESCO tend to leverage a lot of these international days to raise awareness of the issues. The World Press Freedom Day, the International Day to End Impunity against crimes, for crimes against journalists, the so-called Right to Know Day or the Universal Access to Information Day. So all of this we try to leverage and we try to raise awareness of it. So from policy to capacity building to raising awareness. So that is more or less our raison d'etre for the work that we do. And we always try to do more, but we do what we can. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ming. Ms. Yuyun, Dr. Yuyun, I would like to ask, so where are the gaps in the region that, that enable this, impediments to truth telling, or that actually restrict certain, or that becomes a factor in truth telling? So recently now, the hot talk has been, about the weaponization of social media. and the emergence of fake news or alternative truths. So in the region, how can we work together to sort of resolve these issues that we have mentioned?
Thank you. Actually, I'm eyeing on the midterm review of the ASEAN Political Security Community and ASEAN Social Cultural Community Blueprint, because the result of the midterm review can be in the form of lack of recognition of the right to human rights of journalists, and also the space media freedom. And this result can be used to develop a new blueprint 2026 to 2035 to add into it. So I have actually in my agenda to be included there on freedom of religion and belief, because it was not there. And the second one is on media freedom. In terms of media freedom of expression, I think there are some here and there, but nothing about media freedom. So there is an opportunity there at the regional level. In Aicher, from the last workshop we had in December, we come up with the interpretation of Article 23 of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. It is not yet finished because one workshop cannot produce a very good draft of interpretation, but we managed to have some elaborated text in relation to how media freedom need to be understood. What are the state obligation? What are the rights, and who are the right holders under the Article 23 of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. We are going to have another one this year, and then the other one 2022. And freedom of expression and opinion is one of the priorities of Indonesia in Aicher. So we are going to bring this issue forward, and we hope that we can come up with something on 2023 when Indonesia become the chair of ASEAN.
Thank you, Dr. Yuyu. So I would like to throw the next question to either Ms. Melinda or Dr. Jess. Either of you can answer. So clearly, there has been some actions, that in the region, there is some push, no matter how limited, to sort of promote press freedom in the region. I would like I would like to ask you: are these actions, or how are these actions enough to ensure the welfare and safety of journalists? Or in the first place, maybe we can ask, are journalists safe in the region? Maybe you can respond, either of you. Dr. Jess, maybe I would like to ask you.
Well, actually, I also want to hear from Melinda, because there are so many cases happen in the Philippines. Okay, actually, I want to hear from the Philippines as well. But for Thailand, well, actually, we rarely have a case that journalists in Thailand was physically attacked. Actually, we didn't have that many cases like that. It's very rare. And unlike the cases in Cambodia, that like many newspapers or news organization has been charged with like very high tax, right? In order to be an indirect way from the government to close the media. Actually, we are quite lucky that we didn't see that kind of thing as well. But the thing that we can see and we can feel is well, as I mentioned earlier, that when we talk about media freedom, well, before we talk about that stage, that the media got attacked or like abused, right? Actually, media in any country should be able to report without fear and favor. But in Thailand, I can say that the self-censorship, like it is quite common in Thailand, and is that is a symbol and evidence that we still, like cannot be free from fear and favor. Fear from, you know, like some unseeable, you know, like pressure, or someone, you know, someone asks you, your boss, your editor, to avoid or to refrain from talking about this issue, or favor, like they're going to be some connection, like someone like in the government, someone who has connection with the media owner asks you to highlight this news, for example. So in Thailand, I think like well, although we haven't had like case like what we can see in the Philippines or in Cambodia, but well, to be free from fear and favor, it's still far from media in Thailand.
Go ahead, Miss Melinda.
So
Melinda, madam, please.
yeah, thank you. Thank you for your interest in why my country has all these problems. I I had a conversation a long time ago with I think it was Bambang Harimurti, yeah, Bambang. Basically, we agreed that we had the same whole problem of impunity, that people resisted the power of the press, that they are afraid of it, that you never can tell whether you're going to be the object of that power, because media has power, and we have to recognize that. And so when in a meeting where we were discussing the killings in the Philippines of journalists, and we stand apart. I think Cambodia might have now, and Myanmar is definitely coming around on it because of that particular situation that they have. And it has to do really with a culture of guns. It was Bambang who said, we don't have the gun culture, that's why people don't get killed. But there are ways of making them afraid, right? In the Philippines, the gun culture is one of the basic fundamental trades. It is part of the shadow economy. It is part of how criminals, flourish in the syndication. So really, the issue of safety of journalists, unfortunately, has to be thrown back to the capacity of government to establish a society of safety. And we now have a national plan for safety for journalists. But we all said in working on that plan that we really needed to have a strong response on the part of government in order to establish that particular order. So in to answer the question or the curiosity of Dr. Jess, I would have to say you really need to do the sociological study. We did a very brief study of it, which I thought got to the roots of the problem. And that is to the fact that the state agencies have been involved through corruption, through the pursuit of their self-interest, become an agency of violence as well. We emerged from a martial law that had records that could not be settled of the victimization of activists, and then on top of that, the counterinsurgency campaigns that were also had to be scrutinized and had to be looked at. So it's a very deep problem that we face in terms of why there are so many killings. We're the only country that has the Ampatuan massacre, which until now is on appeal and trial. We are now working on a particular a particular policy that perhaps the state might be held to some of its responsibility for so long as a journalist or any other human rights activist might be killed. That we have to redraw the dimensions of human rights defense in order to force government to recognize the responsibility for its protection. That means, what kind of society do you build? What kind of securities do you provide? Or is it security of the powers that be rather than the security of the people that needs to be served? Those are fundamental questions, I think, that need to be thrown at this question. And if you're asking, what do we do about the safety of journalists? I'm saying you go down to the roots of the violence that has been allowed to become so much a force in the society that we live in. It's a lot more to be said than what I've said. And always when I participate in these questions, I feel that any answer is an inadequate answer, because it is part of how complex these things are. And I find that perhaps we should force some government champions to be in this conversation. Some champion that you can really ask them to say, is there hope for us to look to our government as a force in which we can look to a period that we can once again feel safe, that we can once again believe that the resources of government are not going to be used against press and media freedom. Maybe we need to engage government a little bit more and ask them to answer for this fundamental responsibility, which, if they are part of the international community, then they are part of the UN Convention on Human Rights. How much do they believe in it? And because if they don't, then however much we talk and however much we try, we will keep going back to square one. Because in terms of impunity and in terms of the protection of human rights, the major and primary actor for defense and safety and protection will have to be the agency of government, of a good government.
Thank you, Ms. Melinda, for the sharing. Now, I want to throw a question to either Dr. Yuyun or Dr. Ning. No, responding to these issues that Ms. Melinda and Dr. Jess has mentioned, are there good practices in the region that actually ensure the safety and the welfare of the journalists, either through cultural, through legal, institutional? Are there good practices that we can see? Perhaps Dr. Ming can answer first.
The fact is that the UN is intergovernmental, so is ASEAN and ICHR. So there are certain limitations, but at the same time, certain opportunities that allows us to do what we do. The international standards, international humanitarian laws, human rights laws, all of this is based on a consensus and a general agreement by most of the country members that they will uphold, and strive to align themselves towards that ideal. And of course, we know the reality is not there yet. But what we do is that, for example, there is at the Human Rights Council, we do what we call the Universal Periodic Review, which I'm sure some of the CSO members here are very familiar with, doing the shadow report. And that is one of the ways that we publicly hold each of the countries every 4 years, taking their turn to be held accountable for what they have done or not done in the past 4 years. At UNESCO, we have our Director General report on the safety of journalists and the issue of impunity. That is our report that we ask each of the member states where a killing of journalists had taken place and yet to be resolved. And we ask and request information on the status of the investigation of these killings each and every year since 2006. The report is publicly available online for anybody who wants to take a look. So that is our way of holding them accountable in that narrowly defined issue of safety of journalists. The Human Rights Councils, the UPR, looks more at a wider range of human rights infractions So those are some of the ways that we try to ensure that everybody is accountable to everyone. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ning. Dr. Yuyun, your response, please.
Well, during the late of Surin Pitsuan as Secretary General of ASEAN, there has been a number of initiatives bringing media into the regional discourses. And by bringing media into regional coverage, it actually make the role of media visible to member of the states. And I agree with Melinda that we need to have champion from the government, especially in the ASEAN level, to start the discussion, to start the discourses, because without that, the state of media practitioners and media freedom continue to be in status quo as now. So we need to gradually bring the discussion in this, and I think one of the aim of the late Surin Pitsuan is on that, to create a space in which media will be recognized. Uh, 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 After Surin Pitsuan, we do not have that kind of gathering anymore with media, and therefore less report on ASEAN, less engagement with media practitioners, less discussion on the importance of the role of media in regional cooperation. So perhaps this is something that need to be continued and picked up by a high level, as because ASEAN Secretary General is equal with minister level. So by minister level, so the idea, the discussion will have a ground in ASEAN. In ICHR, we have now the complaint mechanism, but very incomplete complaint mechanism. Is three-step complaint mechanisms. We haven't received any complaints in relation to journalists as of now. But we wanted to test this mechanism to be able to be functioning effectively. And in the last ICHR meeting, on the 33rd ICHR meeting, ICHR has had a consensus to come up with the agenda item 15 on the current development of human rights in ASEAN. In the 33rd ICHR meeting, we talk about the coup and the implication to human rights in Myanmar. But this particular agenda item can be used for anything, because the title is Current Development of Human Rights in ASEAN, so it can be anything. It would be good to also equip us with a number of cases of media freedom, in relation to media freedom, so we can table it uh, using this agenda item 15. Not sure what would be the output to address the problem, but at least the issue need to be recognized, because to find solution for the problem, we need to recognize that as a problem first, and then we can discuss further on the solution and who will be participating and so on and so on. So these are, I'm not sure whether these are good practices, but these are something that we are working now gradually in ASEAN.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yun. Now, we are heading towards the last segment of our discussion. But before that, let me let you know that there will be a question and answer portion after the last segment of the discussion. So for the participants or attendees who want to ask questions, please utilize the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, where you can post questions, or you can also put them in the chat box on the side. Now we are headed. Now going back to the discussion, we are headed towards recommendations. How do we, as advocates, as workers, as agents for a more democratic ASEAN or Southeast Asia, work together in order to promote media space? Maybe I can go directly to Miss Melinda. What are your thoughts? How can we work together? What sort of activities can bring us together?
I want to thank Dr. Yun for bringing up ICHAR again, and it's a possibility of opening there a window for at least starting up the discourse on a level at which it will just not be talk, that we can identify certain ways indeed in making media freedom and government's responsibility to protect and promote and strengthen media as an institution, not equally, not in all the same ways, but at least to come to the basic fundamental value that media is part of a good society, whatever you call that society. Hopefully, if you claim that you're a democracy, then then you will treat that so I think that one of the things that needs to be done at this point in time is basically to engage ICHR. We had, I don't know, the last WPD day, which was held in Jakarta. So tell me what year that was. When indeed a whole room basically said that we need to engage HR. We need to look at where that is. But of course, it depends. Okay, you have a minister, Pistuan, who of course was a liberal. It's not always a liberal that sits in HR. I mean, HR can become the most inert thing if it is handled by a non-champion of the values that we are talking about. So we need the bureaucracy, the people who are there in HR to keep us as a community connected to the possibilities of making HR, whatever we say, a real thing, a living thing, that from one to another phase, or in fact that we should campaign who should be there in order to make HR meaningful. Otherwise, it's just another government agency. And I'm telling you now, even the most energetic champions can become de-energized if you place him in a place where governments do not care about some of these issues that we are now discussing. But I think if we walk out of this discussion, we need to take that with us. And if Dr. Yun is going to be one of those champions, then let it be. Let's begin. Let's start. I could go on and I won't.
Dr. Yu, please respond to the question.
I think we need to fill the gap of no regional coalition right now in relation to media freedom. SIPA is no longer here, so we need to have one.
Wait. Let me. We are in the process.
Okay, good.
I am one of the original founder members, CMFR, that put together SIPA when in 1998 we had 3 countries, Thailand, Philippines, and Indonesia.
Okay. So,
right now, we have organizations that are saying we may not have the formal organization, but we are still a network. And we want the support of regions of the international community to find our way back into out of the issues of the maze of running a development agency, a development NGO, a media development NGO. That's what it is, right? And you have membership now that seems dedicated to that. For as long as I have the energy, I will play that a role, whatever that role might be, to keep it going, to energize other people, so that whether we have an organization or not, it is going to be alive. Whether we work with larger institutions such as the ADN, we are open to all these possibilities. But it is still there. There are still champions in all the different countries of SIPA, some stronger than others, but it's there. I'm sorry. I had to put that in.
Good to hear that, because we if we have a network and now we need to have an agenda focusing on ASEAN advocacy, and had at least one or two big agenda and working toward this point. And for instance, like Bambang Harimurti suggestion on to come up with a regional body. It can be entities, it can be anything like that under ASEAN to raise awareness about media freedom, to strengthen the role of journalists, and so on and so on. How to include media freedom as part of regionalism in ASEAN. My observation, since human rights become part of regionalism project in ASEAN, so this space create a lot of interaction among member states. Interaction, norm setting, dialogue, discussion. Within this space there is a misunderstanding, non-consensus, but the process going on, and that's how the human rights has a journey in ICHR, from none to now. It's slow, sometimes disappointed, but space is there. So we need to have this kind of space to discuss about anything related to media freedom, the person, the welfare, the safety. So we need to surface this idea in the regional project of ASEAN. Or without my observation, again, my personal observation, without the space, you are not exist in ASEAN project of regionalism. So sometimes institutional approach may have a lot of weaknesses, but still useful in international relation discussion. So that's one suggestion I would like to make. And the other one is 2023 is the chairship of Indonesia. Perhaps because 2023 is only 2 years ahead, 2 years in the future. So we almost half year in 2021, and then there will be 2022, and then 2023. So it might be useful for agenda to implement the campaign, to implement the agenda. So to me, the way I see it, 2021 and 2022, after you have clear agenda, is the process of mobilization, getting stakeholders in, some preparation, and then 2023 is the launching of the agenda, if the agenda is agreed among the relevant actors.
Thank you, Dr. Yuyun. Dr. Ming, your reactions or your response, please.
UNESCO is forever very happy to support the initiative mentioned, and very happy to host in collaboration with ICHR, ASEAN, to involve all the stakeholders in the region. Very happy to do that. And in fact, we have done that. The meeting that Melinda mentioned in Jakarta was in 2017, where we also discussed the regional mechanism, a lot of back and forth. But there are real logistical and bureaucratic reasons that it has not taken place. And one of the better developments in the past 2 years has been the creation of this Southeast Asian Press Council Alliance. Again, this was also discussed back in 2017. The fact that not all ASEAN Southeast Asian countries, let alone ASEAN countries, have a press council, but neither do all of them have human rights commissions. So it's always an imperfect solution to a very complicated issue. And but we are fine with that. We will work and we will collaborate with all the relevant stakeholders in the region towards the goal of strengthening freedom of expression for everyone. And those are some of our commitment, and it has never changed in the past, I don't know how many years by now, decades. And we will continue to work with anyone, so happy to collaborate. And that's one of the things that I think is good. I would like to just touch on one of the things that was highlighted in the beginning, which is the sense of reconnecting journalism, news media, and the people. That is something that is not being done enough and at a large enough scale. There is more than just the reason of technology, more than just the reason of big tech giants swallowing up all the advertising dollars. Is the disconnect between everyday person, a lay person, and the business and the function and the role of journalism. And to link back to that, it will cause a positive reinforcing cycle. The readers demand better quality journalism. Journalists produce better journalism, and the cycle improves itself. So that is actually something that we can really do something about. And of course, we have started work on our media information literacy programs, but really, we can really scale it up into something more significant on that part. I think Melinda has something to say. Back to you.
Thank you. In fact, directly to respond to the last point that you bring up, really the pandemic has given us much more time to think about where we have gone wrong. And it has been one of the observations in any number of papers that we have written for CMFR, to note how the media has become an institution of power itself, and thus is closer to government that is supposed to be watching and scrutinizing. The most credentialed source in almost all news agendas are government officials. They almost have to be forced to look at what civic society is doing, what NGOs are doing, what community-based organizations are doing. So part of what needs to be done, in fact, that you have brought up, and I would just like to add that has been one of our central messages. Now it will come up again when I speak at the WPD program in Manila on Monday, is that this is a time to reestablish our connections with the people that we are sworn to serve. The people we are sworn to serve is the public and the community, and to begin to identify and to create the common ground on which we can become community despite the differences of politics, of religion, of faith, of custom, of language. This is a function of media, a kind of consolidation, a force for consolidation of what makes us a community. Because if we're not a community, then we can't do anything. And that, thank you, Ming, for bringing that up, as I have taken it and basically want to say that, yes, that is the direction as well in which the pandemic has forced us to look at our role within the community that we are serving. And because the government has been so poor as a source of responding to the pandemic, that the communities have been the most powerful source of helping one another. You know, the community pantries that have said, you may be the poorest of the poor, but you can still put a little thing into the pantry and someone else can pick it up. Where do you get that? But the media has at least awakened to the point of saying there is news in the people, in the ordinary people, that sometimes may be more important than what the spokesperson is saying on behalf of whoever. Thank you.
Thank you very
Sorry, I just wanted to add, Pramesh is not here, but the example of Malaysia Kini, they're able to raise all the funding needed to pay off the penalty, the fine, 125,000 US dollars within 4 hours, was a very, very good example of the community coming together. So I think if Pramesh was here, he would have given that example as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ming. Now, I believe since we are a bit short on time, we can just conclude with, we cannot hold the question and answer portion. But before we conclude, I would like to ask the remaining panelists, what is your message in one sentence? Can you give us a bit of a soundbite or a message for Press Freedom Day? Since Dr. Ming is the one who last spoke, may I ask you for a message for Press Freedom Day?
Journalism is for public interest information. So we would strive to create public interest journalism. And by doing that, we will have public support and people will see that the importance of journalism. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ming. Miss Yu Yun, please deliver one sentence message for
My
our.
message is here. Because insider journalists also arrested and detained. So my message for Press Freedom Day, Press Freedom Day is here.
Release all political prisoners. Okay, in Myanmar. Miss Melinda, for your one message, one sentence message, we would like to hear from you.
Yes, my one sentence message is the crisis, the pandemic has forced should force the journalism community to re-examine the way it performs its function and to reinvent and to find ways by which they can better serve the community that they are sworn to serve. Public interest is one of the ways of describing it. The common good is another one. That is in fact the objective of what freedom and a free press must do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Melinda. So with that, I think we've had a very enjoyable time and a very important discussion regarding the press freedom situation in Southeast Asia. So again, we are glad that we are joined by our panelists who gave us their thoughts on how to actually improve in the current state of press freedom in the region. And perhaps we hope that through these discussions, we can catalyze further actions, not only in our own respective countries, but throughout the region, so that we can bring about the unimpeded flow of truth and truth-telling in the region, that all of us are free to deliver and receive information without any impediments, and that our policies and our political environments actually bring about and respect the press freedom and the freedom of information. So again, we would like to thank our panelists, our attendees who have joined us this afternoon for this wonderful discussion. And we hope that in the future, we'll have further energetic discussions like this. So we hope that our panelists will be joining us again next time in further endeavors. So with that, I thank you, and I would like to wish everyone a good afternoon and have a nice night. Thank you very much.
Carol. Very good.
Thank you, Melinda. Thank you, Ming. Thank you, Mbak Yuyun.
Very much.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Jess.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mandi. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.